Hi, everybody.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Welcome.
I'm going to apologize in advance for really weird lighting tonight. I'm in an apartment in New York City that has very moody lighting, which is awesome, but terrible for Zoom. So
But
if
you've
I
got some,
have devil eyebrows or whatever, you'll know what's happening.
kind of fancy looking glasses, so I think that makes up for it.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. And I loved the update you sent us and what you featured there. As you know, I just wanted to have you join us, and I appreciate you offering to join us. We will be meeting, as you know, we've funded Every Woman Treaty through this current fiscal year, and we will be discussing prior to our next fiscal year how we move forward with Every Woman Treaty. But I wanted the board to hear from you personally, and especially be able to ask questions. One thing I'd love for you to cover, I'll just say at the top while it's on my mind, is you know, we have some very vague idea of the treaty process and flying around the world and having meetings and whatnot.
Yep.
But if you could give in addition to anything else you've prepared, give the board a little insight into the training programs that are going on, because there's an awful lot of work going on in training activists, which is happening now and already helping the world beyond whether or not the treaty is successful.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would be number one. And the second one that I think is really important is the whole hand framework for the treaty. So there's a real idea that the treaty might actually make a difference.
Right. What would it actually
if it comes to fruition? So
sure. Yeah,
I'll leave you to it.
Well, it's such an honor and pleasure to be here. Obviously, I know I've written this in previous reports, but let me just start with saying, you know, Jerry and Christiane were the very first people who ever pledged toward Run for Congo Women, which is something I started in 2005. And we went on to raise $16 million. But with that first pledge, kind of got the ball rolling on other people signing up. And so we really have always tried to leverage that. And again, Jerry and Soham, we were the first folks to put $5,000 in as seed money to start Sister Somalia, which now has attracted funding from major funders around the world. And my co-founders have been shortlisted for the Nobel Peace Prize several years in a row because of their incredible work. And again, starting there, they were working with child soldiers. They were not doing work with women until we started that work. And that Soham money was $5,000 that first year, but we used it to get the word out, attract more interest, managed to get a cover story in the New York Times, built momentum, other funders got interested, and it really grew from there. And again, I remember telling Jerry, sitting actually in my mom's living room where she is right now, in 2013, that we had this crazy idea that we wanted to work for a global treaty to end violence against women and girls. I remember one of the first things he said was, well, I hope you'll talk to us when you're looking for funding. And he gave the first major gift we ever received, which was $25,000 at that time. And so it's really been extraordinary. And it's how transformative those catalytic gifts have been from the beginning for us. And I mean, I genuinely can say, had it not been for Soham's support over the last, you know, I mean, at this point, I guess it's 17 years, which is confronting in its own way, just how much it has meant and how seriously I, as an activist, have taken that, and how seriously we've taken that as a responsibility to leverage that investment. So with that, I'll dive in and start talking a little bit more about the treaty, because I know treaties sound kind of vague and it's a little bit hard to know exactly what that means. So clearly this is a campaign for the treaty, but I think I'll start by just sharing, you know, as Shannon pointed out, we have always seen this campaign as a mechanism to grow the global women's movement. So, you know, rather than being a US-based campaign or going straight to policymakers to rattle their cages around what, you know, sort of think tanks feel should happen, we have gone straight to frontline women's rights activists who really are the experts. These are people who have been stalked, you know, hacked, had, death threats, have had family members murdered because of their incredible work in really tough places like Afghanistan, Somalia, et cetera. Big diversity of activists. So our mantra has always been nothing about us without us. So if we're talking about policy that will affect women with disabilities or Indigenous women, et cetera, we have always made sure that they are the ones who are really driving what that policy should look like. So when we were developing the first draft of the treaty and asking questions about what it would need to look like to be meaningful to them, we went through an 8-year consultation with folks to make sure that it was truly informed, and like going back to activists again, asking for more feedback to come up with this vision. And so in that process, we've grown something called the 1,000 Voices Training Program, where we're training activists in diplomacy, international law, media, public speaking, et cetera. So they're using those skills well beyond this campaign. And so we really have grown to feel that there are a lot of organizations out there that are doing extraordinary work. There are organizations with much bigger budgets than ours that are not having the same kind of impact we're having today, just increasing capacity of the global women's movement, never mind this layer of global systems change. But it's worked really well because it means we don't just talk to activists about going in and talking to diplomats. We train them and then we take them into meetings with real diplomats. So, one example would be Malalai Papalzai, who joined the training program, the first cohort of 1,000 Voices in Afghanistan, as a child marriage activist in the winter, spring of 2021. Then she had to be evacuated. She did manage to get out. She got to Poland and had a really hard year there for losing her work, and also because there was a lot of racism. She wears a hijab, et cetera. So we invited her to come to Geneva. And she came to Geneva. We bought her train ticket to come to Geneva, and before you know it, there she is in meetings with the ambassador of the UK to the United Nations and the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. And she's actually talking about her lived experience as an activist. And that's something that imprints for her, no matter what happens for her moving forward, that she's someone of influence who people are going to listen to. And so that's just one example. I have a quick PowerPoint presentation that I can do, if that would be useful, because I think sometimes those steps and stages in the treaty creation process can be a little overwhelming. So do I have screen share capability here? It looks like I do. Okay, great. Let me
just interrupt to say too that Dr. Nagarajan just joined us too, so we might want to welcome him.
Welcome.
Whoops. Okay, where is it? Sorry, it looks
Okay,
like...
take your time. We'll welcome one of our other board members.
Perfect.
Hi, Dr. Nagarajan.
Thank
Welcome.
thank you. I'm
So
sorry
nice
to be
see
late.
you. No problem.
I'm having a severe pain here, neuralgia.
Oh,
Right.
Well, Dr. Nagarajan, we're so happy you could join us. We're sorry you've been having some health issues and pain.
Okay.
We have Ann Shannon joining us now.
no, Lisa.
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Ann, gosh. We have Lisa Shannon with us now, who's
Okay.
presenting about the Every Woman Treaty that Soham has been supporting since it started 9 years ago,
Yeah.
which is the effort to do a global treaty to end violence against women and girls.
Okay.
And so you came at a perfect time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and dive in and just show this is Malalai in front of the Palais des Nations in Geneva, following meetings, talking about this being her dream come true. So just to begin with, I want to just share as a very basic, our purpose is to unlock human flourishing by delivering a life free from violence for every woman and girl. And so while our focus is ending violence against women and girls, that's rooted in the idea that violence against women and girls is getting in the way of human flourishing for everyone. So whether we're trying to deliver a program around food security or climate change or, any number, education, et cetera, that violence against women has a tremendous impact on all of those efforts. And so it's really important to address it as one of those root causes of any number of cascading effects. And what we do specifically is catalyze leadership, starting with the grassroots, but going all the way up to the heads of state, meaning presidents and prime ministers, to enact global systems change to end that violence. And we do that by really centering those frontline activists through everything we do. So again, we don't like to skip that step ever. And that's actually going to be one of our biggest challenges moving forward, as you hear about the updates now. So our strategy right now is twofold. We sort of started with our strategic plan in 2017, outlining what we believed would be 6 key strategies, and we have just continued to narrow it down to the most effective things that we can do right now. And so I'm just going to give you a little context here. The whole hand framework. So what would the treaty do? Basically, we see this as kind of combining the best of public health and human rights. This is not going to be a traditional human rights treaty, which would state a lot of rights potentially as an aspiration, but actually function more like a sustainable development goal. So saying, here are the 4 key interventions that we know are extremely effective. The data is there to back that up. So strong law, having a rigorous legal code, training and accountability, though, for police, judges, doctors, nurses, because if the law is there, it doesn't mean much if nobody knows that it exists, right? So you have to include that portion of it. Services for survivors, certainly, that's where most of the world has focused their attention up until now. But the real place that you get cultural transformation is through prevention education. And so our activists from the beginning, and again, this is really based on that listening, have said, if nothing else, the prevention education, because that's where the real transformation happens. However, all these things can only happen if there's adequate funding to end violence against women and girls. And right now, the global funding, there was a study that was done that showed it was only $408 million a year in international funding to end violence against women and girls globally. So it's about 11 cents per female on Earth. Like that doesn't buy a bottle of water or a stick of gum for women in most places. So part of what we're doing through this campaign is focusing on really framing that up and being very clear that that is not a serious commitment to the most widespread human rights violation on Earth, and a human rights violation that's very much on the rise right now. Between the pandemic, climate change, online violence being a big new avenue with very serious effects on women. So the idea being you have to properly fund it. And so we're calling for $4 billion a year in funding, or $1 per female on Earth as a starting place to be able to implement these interventions. Now, if that sounds like sort of a lofty idea, please note that the Landmines Treaty and the Tobacco Treaty both catalyzed massive upticks in funding when they were passed. So the Landmines Treaty had a new $500 million a year in commitments within 36 hours of it passing. And that level has stayed there ever since 1997. So this truly could catalyze that kind of money. And then finally, data and monitoring. And this is another place it's very different than a traditional human rights treaty. Traditional human rights treaties, nations will kind of come and they'll write a story basically about how they're doing. And they could say, oh, look, we're doing this little program over here that helped 12 people. Look how much progress we've made. And we're like, no, actually, we want to know objectively how you're doing against these metrics, right? So rigor and accountability that then can be used as a tool in the hands of activists to hold their own governments accountable. So that's really fundamentally what we're aiming for the treaty to do. And it's something that it's what the activists around the world have asked for. So I'll breeze through this quickly because I want to have plenty of time for, whoops, oh, there we go. So this is from our original strategic plan, forgive me, it's just tracking other treaty processes. We're not at this place in year 5, we're closer to year 7 or 8 right now. Basically what we did early on is we went through and tracked a number of treaties that were created and what the steps and stages were to create them. And we've been following that plan. And so where we are right now is, and I'll show you this more clearly in the next couple of slides, is right around the call for a treaty and forming the working group. This is extremely significant, and it's only just happened in the last few months that we're moving into forming the working group. So we are in a radically different place now than we were 4 months ago. So this is another very simpler way to put it. We see the work happening in 4 phases, and right now we are in phase 2. So the first phase of the work from 2013, 2018, you could say 2020 actually, based on the draft, that we were bringing those activists together, forming a coalition, doing a deep dive, facilitating dialogue, to see, where people wanted this to go. And then in phase 2, 2019 is when we opened dialogue with nations. And so our very clear goal for phase 2 is to get a group of nations to call a minimum of 100 nations to the negotiating table. And so that's our gating item. We know we are in phase 3 when treaty negotiations open. Right now, we have worked, I believe at this point, it's more than 360 meetings with 110 nations, which is far more than half the nations on Earth we've met with at this point, many of them multiple times. So it's going really well. And again, in almost every single one of those meetings, there have been frontline activists in that room having that conversation. So once we get to the treaty negotiation, we expect that to take a couple of years. That's normal. It would be probably 4 to 6, what they call preparatory conferences, where nations come together and negotiate the text of the treaty. And we want to make sure that frontline activists, we've been very careful about who we're approaching as champion nations, because they need to invite activists to the table to be there and make sure those voices are still heard. So there's been a real selectivity for us in how we've thought about this. And so we'd be looking to get those financial commitments in place and hold those preparatory conferences. Then we know we're moving into phase 4 when the treaty is opened for signature. And then we're focused on getting nations to ratify it and run implementation campaigns with our frontline activists and that network we've developed across the world. So these are sort of those 4 main stages. And again, we are in phase 2. And I'm delighted to say at this point, we're pretty deep in phase 2. So this is kind of a breakdown of the steps in phase 2. And hopefully this is helpful. It begins with nations making public calls for the treaty, and to some extent, some celebrities or high, high clout folks like Nobel Peace Prize winners, et cetera. And we do have a number of Nobel Peace Prize winners who have called for the treaty. We've had the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, the President of Nigeria, the President of Colombia, and the President of the DR Congo and Costa Rica have all called for the new treaty. And most of that has happened in the last year. Then the next phase is co-hosted events, so those nations start talking to each other. We had our first event co-hosted by the Democratic Republic of Congo and Costa Rica on October 28th in Geneva. This was extremely significant because it's the first time that nations are out there recruiting other nations to join this effort. Huge, huge, huge thing for Costa Rica to join the Democratic Republic of Congo means we have the beginning of our group of friends. They have actually said that 7 to 20 is too many. They want to start with 5. Sierra Leone at that event raised their hand and said, count us in, we want to be there. Actually, Shannon, I haven't even shared this with you. The president of Tunisia, his office called Najat in last week, and she met with them, and they're very seriously looking at it. We're also in very serious dialogue with Jordan. We have contacts in the royal office. And we're doggedly pursuing that right now, and things are looking really good. We're waiting for an outcome on the elections in Nepal. We're having conversations with Costa Rica and Chile. We have a short list of nations that we're targeting. But most importantly, the big shift that's happened is that nations are now reaching out to other nations to get them involved. So this is no longer us as a grassroots group strictly kept knocking on doors, trying to get them to be interested. The ambassador in Geneva, who's the lead for Costa Rica, is passionate about this. She's giving it everything she has, as is the president of DRC, of Congo. in pursuing it. So moving forward, they would form a group of friends. There would be more convenings. They want to have a lot of meetings this year because that's how this stuff gets done. And then there would be collective calls through UN resolutions or African Union resolutions, et cetera. Money would be pledged and the preparatory conferences would be planned. And that's, once those dates are set, then we know we're moving into phase 3. So that's really where we are right now. I wrote more stuff here. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to just say coalition engagement has gone up. Thank you very much. Here's Malala with the ambassador of the UK. Very cute. Costa Rica came on board because of Maricela. And I do just want to emphasize, she's someone who we only met last January. She joined the Thousand Voices program and she's friends with the ambassador in Geneva. And so she started calling her up saying, we need this treaty. And at first the ambassador was like, I don't know. We have CETA, we have this, we have that. She's like, but is it really enough if 75% of women on Earth are not covered by a regional treaty? She was like, you know what, you're right. And now she's our biggest champion. Maricela was with me in the room when they committed. She's been there, she's organizing throughout Latin America now. So that's really an example of those frontline activists making it happen. With that, I'm just gonna stop because I wanna save time for conversation and I could talk. So I'm gonna stop. But I just wanna say again, this is 100% thanks to Soham. Without your gift, we absolutely would not be here. At the beginning, we did not think we could run this campaign on less than 1.5 million a year. Never pretended we could, and that was 10 years ago. So if you think about today's dollars, and we've grown now to 1.2 million a year, and you can see how effective that is. But I genuinely don't believe any of this would have happened without Soham's transformative gift of $250 a year for 2 years. So just absolutely my deepest thanks for that catalytic investment.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Really appreciate you. I'm sorry you prepared things we didn't get to, but I find the way that you think and prepare your materials makes a lot of sense to me. So I really appreciate seeing that again. And I'm amazed that you're contacting Costa Rica. It was through the Thousand Voices program.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
look what happened there. So that's, that's exciting.
But also let's just frame for a minute too, like Najat did the Thousand Voices program. She has this vehicle and now she's being called into the president's office to talk to them. That's not access that she's ever had previously, right? So
That's
the idea that
Nepal?
someone, say again?
Is that in Nepal?
That's Tunisia. Tunisia. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we figured out a little formula actually for getting interest from a nation. So that's been really helpful for us. We have a system for it now. Art and science.
So going forward, you know, we don't know how long the rest of the process will take or how it's going to look.
Correct.
But how does your funding look going forward? Where are the gaps? What is the money? What will the money be used for? Is it a continuation of basically funding the meetings that have to happen? Just some idea about that, and also any questions we have. We have time for questions.
Shall I go ahead and dive in, or why don't?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So with this phase shift, there are a lot of needs in that all of a sudden we have nations who are, this is not abstract. We have nations who are very seriously interested, and we are a scrappy group of you know, our core staff is about 10 people managing this. So we are hiring a chief of campaign, which is highly necessary. And that's going to be someone, we're really looking for someone who's worked on a treaty campaign before, who knows diplomatic rules and can kind of see how this goes. And it's a really significant hire for us. But one of the biggest challenges moving forward is making sure that those frontline activists stay at the table. And so, for instance, the Costa Rica and DRC really want us to have a convening this year that will include the core group of nations and then a core group of activists to devise, let's say, the first draft treaty with the nation stamp on it, because our first draft treaty is just activists. And so, you know, those diplomatic convenings, it turns out, are expensive, not fancy, but they add up when they start. Like when we looked at the list of events they want to have this year, it's a little bit overwhelming. But mostly we need to be there effectively serving as the interim secretariat, meaning the embassy staffs aren't going to staff the campaign. They're looking to us for that. So we're writing briefs. We're having meetings. We're coordinating for them on their behalf. And that just comes with staffing requirements to be able to keep the process going and respond. Diplomatic travel has been expensive for us, and there's no way around it. When you get invited to meet with the president, you have to go. And so we are in that situation. And I think the nervous making thing for the upcoming year is now that Costa Rica and DRC are starting to do all this outreach, we're getting like a lot more invitations and a lot more interest is coming. So now the conversation is kind of like, well, if you're going to join the core group of friends, you're going to need to join in the next 3 months or you won't be included in that core group. So all of a sudden there are a bunch of nations who are like, we want to get in there. So that's a component of it. So being able to support activists, attending some of these key meetings, making sure that we're properly staffing the diplomatic effort and that we have the heft to be able to provide reports and support materials for ambassadors who are moving this forward is a very big need. And if I may explain just the structure of our funding right now, you know, SOHUM stepped up with the $250,000 that was a match for another funder who really would not have given that money. The first $125,000 a year and then the $250,000, that funder was not going to give the money unless there truly was a partner who was going to jump in. And so that partner's money covers most of the administrative costs and basic functioning of the organization. Another funder stepped in to support the 1,000 Voices program. So we've actually, there was a naming opportunity for her. So it's called the Andrani's Light 1,000 Voices Fellowship Program. She's done a lot of education for frontline activists. So she's covering that very specifically. And there are some funds there that go to support seed funding for coalitions. But the SOHUM money has been funding the diplomatic effort. And that's because I think more traditional funders tend to want to fund that, I don't want to say widget sort of thing, but like, you know, you give this much money, you get this many mosquito nets, etc. But funding something that actually is working toward global systems change, you know, like in many ways, it's easier to fundraise around a rape kit than it is a treaty to end violence against women, when actually the dignified thing is for women to be safe in the first place and for that cultural transformation to take place. So that's where the money has been going. Core functioning of the coalition. So all the organizing around the global coalition and the diplomatic work.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to jump in quickly before we go